from her! Give it back now! I saw you take it!
An 8-year-old girl stood trembling in the aisle of Flight 447, tears streaming down her brown cheeks, her small fingers clutching a gold locket that didn't belong to her. The airplane cabin had gone completely silent except for the sound of a flight attendant screaming at this child to sit down immediately. But Zara Winters wasn't moving. Her voice cracked with emotion, but her words cut through the tension like a knife. You took what doesn't belong to you. My grandmother taught me stealing is wrong, no matter who you are. Dozens of passengers whipped out their phones, cameras pointed at the blonde flight attendant whose face had gone from rage to shock in an instant. In first class, an elderly black woman sat slumped in her seat, distressed and exhausted, watching this little girl defend her when no one else would. What happened on Flight 447 that day would change everything. But to understand how an 8-year-old ended up confronting a thief at 30,000 feet, we need to go back to where it all began that morning. The story started 6 hours earlier at Philadelphia International Airport. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of early morning travelers rushing to catch their flights, dragging suitcases, checking phones, grabbing overpriced coffee. But if you looked closely, really closely, you would have noticed a little girl who seemed to notice everything. Zara Winters sat cross-legged near Gate B7, completely absorbed in a worn astronomy book that looked like it had been read 100 times. The cover was creased, the pages dog-eared, but to Zara, it was treasure. She turned each page carefully, her dark eyes scanning diagrams of constellations and distant galaxies with the intensity of someone twice her age. Her mother, Simone Winters, sat beside her scrolling through her phone. Simone was a nurse, exhausted from a 3-day medical conference, her scrubs packed away in the carry-on at her feet. She wore comfortable jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She glanced at her daughter and smiled. Even at 8 years old, Zara had always been different. While other kids played with dolls or watched cartoons, Zara wanted to know how rockets worked, why stars exploded, what it would take to travel to Mars. She asked questions that left adults stammering for answers. Simone checked the time and stood up. Come on, baby. Let's freshen up before boarding. Zara tucked her book under her arm and followed her mother to the restroom. Inside, Simone lifted Zara onto the counter and began braiding her hair with practiced hands, weaving the thick coils into 2 neat French braids. As she worked, Zara swung her legs and talked non-stop about neutron stars and black holes. Simone listened patiently, even though she understood maybe half of what her daughter was saying. When she finished the second braid, she looked at Zara in the mirror. Baby, you know what Grandma always used to say? Simone's voice got quieter. Zara's grandmother had passed away just 11 months ago, and some days the absence still felt raw. Zara nodded, meeting her mother's eyes in the reflection. She said that smart isn't enough. You have to be brave too. Being smart means you see things other people don't see. But being brave means you speak up about what you see, even when it's hard. Even when people don't want to hear it. Zara absorbed this, her young face serious. What if speaking up makes people mad at you? Simone kissed the top of her daughter's head. Then you know you're doing something important. The right thing usually isn't the easy thing. They returned to the gate just as boarding began. Zara noticed things on the walk back that most people would have missed. She counted 12 planes visible through the windows and categorized them by size. She read the departure board and noticed that Gate C-14's flight to Denver had been delayed by 40 minutes. She saw an elderly white woman with a walker looking confused near the bathrooms, clearly lost. Without hesitation, Zara walked up to her. Excuse me, are you looking for your gate? The woman blinked down at her, surprised. Oh, yes, sweetheart. I'm supposed to be at gate A9, but I can't figure out which way that is. Zara pointed down the corridor. That way, then turn left at the food court. It's the 3rd gate on your right. You have 25 minutes before boarding. The woman's face lit up with relief. Thank you, dear. What a smart girl you are. Zara smiled and returned to her mother, who had watched the entire exchange with quiet pride. When their group was called for boarding, Simone and Zara joined the line. They walked down the jetway, Zara still clutching her astronomy book, and stepped onto the plane. The flight attendants smiled at them with the practiced politeness of people who greet thousands of strangers every week. Zara and her mother squeezed past the first-class cabin and made their way to the back of the plane. Row 32, seats C and D middle seats. Simone helped Zara settle in by the window, stowing their bags in the overhead compartment. Zara immediately opened her book again, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the ground crew load luggage and prepare the plane for departure. Her mind was already in the clouds. While Zara settled into economy, a very different scene was unfolding in first class. Seat 3A. Vivienne Cole arranged herself with the grace of someone who had been flying first class for longer than most flight attendants had been alive. At 73 years old, Vivienne carried herself like royalty, not because she was arrogant, but because she had earned every ounce of her dignity through decades of hard work and perseverance. She wore an elegant purple suit tailored perfectly to her frame, a string of cream-colored pearls around her neck, and carried a designer handbag that cost more than some people's monthly rent. But if you looked at her face, you'd see the warmth in her deep brown eyes and the smile lines around her mouth that spoke of a woman who had lived fully. Vivienne settled into her leather seat and pulled out a copy of the Financial Times. She read through articles about stock market fluctuations and aerospace industry developments, making small notes in the margins with an expensive pen. After a few minutes, she carefully removed her jewelry. First, the diamond earrings that sparkled even in the airplane's artificial light. Then, the heavy gold bracelet that had been a gift to herself when her company's stock first hit $1 billion valuation. Finally, and most carefully, she removed an antique gold locket from around her neck. The locket was old, probably 70 years old at least, with delicate engravings and the initials VC etched into the front. This locket was different from the other pieces. This one carried weight beyond its gold. Vivienne opened the locket briefly, looking at the tiny photograph inside. A young black couple smiled back at her, frozen in time, both of them impossibly young and full of hope. She and her late husband, Thomas, on their wedding day in 1975. Thomas had been gone for 8 years now, but Vivienne still wore this locket every single day. It was the last thing she put on in the morning and the first thing she removed at night. She closed it gently and placed all 3 pieces of jewelry into a purple velvet pouch, pulling the drawstring tight. Then she tucked the pouch into the seat pocket directly in front of her, right next to the safety information card and the airline magazine no one ever reads. The passenger in seat 3B, an older white gentleman in an expensive suit, glanced over at Vivienne. "Heading somewhere special?" he asked politely. Vivienne smiled. "My granddaughter's graduation." MIT. Mechanical engineering. The man's eyebrows rose, impressed. "That's wonderful. Congratulations to your family." Vivienne's smile widened. "Thank you. I've been flying first class for 40 years, ever since my company went public. But this trip might be my favorite one yet." She didn't elaborate on what her company was or what she did. She had learned long ago that people made assumptions, and sometimes it was more interesting to let them. Vivienne reclined her seat slightly, pulled a thin cashmere blanket over her lap, and closed her eyes. The hum of the airplane engines was soothing, familiar. Within minutes, she had drifted off to sleep, her breathing slow and peaceful. She had no idea that in a few hours, she would wake up to a nightmare. She had no idea that the velvet pouch she had so carefully tucked away would disappear. And she certainly had no idea that her rescue would come from an 8-year-old girl sitting in row 32. Before we continue, if you're invested in Zara's story and want to see how this unfolds, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. And let me know in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly? What did you do about it? Now, let's talk about Candace Hartwell. Because every story has a villain, and Candace wore her villainy like a badge of honor, hidden just beneath a smile that never reached her eyes. At 42 years old, Candace had been a flight attendant for 15 years, long enough to have perfected the art of appearing professional while harboring deep contempt for half the people she served. She stood in the forward galley before boarding, surrounded by 4 other flight attendants receiving their pre-flight briefing. Candace was the lead attendant on this flight, which meant she got to boss everyone around, and she relished that power. Her blonde hair was styled in a tight bun, her makeup applied a bit too heavily, foundation caked in the creases around her eyes and mouth. She wore the regulation navy blue uniform with a red scarf tied precisely around her neck, but somehow she made it look severe rather than elegant. As the crew went over passenger counts and meal options, Candace interrupted constantly, correcting people on minor details, pointing out mistakes that didn't actually matter. Her favorite target was Rhonda Baptiste, a younger black flight attendant who was relatively new to the airline. "Rhonda, we've been over this before. First class gets priority for everything. If they need something, you stop whatever you're doing and handle it immediately. Economy passengers can wait." Rhonda nodded patiently, used to Candace's condescension. "Yes, Candace, I understand." But Candace wasn't done. "Do you? Because last week I had to remind you 3 times about proper service protocol. We represent this airline. Standards matter." The other flight attendants exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. No one wanted to be Candace's next target. When the briefing ended, passengers began boarding. Candace positioned herself at the entrance of the plane, greeting people with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. But watch closely, because her demeanor changed depending on who walked through that door. When a well-dressed white couple in their 50s approached, Candace's smile became genuine, her voice syrupy sweet. "Welcome aboard. Let me help you with that bag. You're in first class? Wonderful, right this way." She personally escorted them to their seats, practically falling over herself to assist them. Minutes later, when a young black man in a hoodie and jeans approached with a first-class boarding pass, Candace's smile tightened. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass, please?" He handed it to her, confused. She studied it for a moment too long, as if looking for proof it was fake. "Seat 2C. Down there." She pointed vaguely and turned away, offering no assistance with his carry-on, no welcoming pleasantries. The pattern repeated itself throughout boarding. White passengers who looked wealthy got the royal treatment. Everyone else got the bare minimum or less. Then came Mr. Pemberton, a silver-haired white man in his 60s wearing a tailored suit and Rolex watch that caught the light. Candace's entire face transformed. "Mr. Pemberton. How wonderful to see you again. How was your trip to Philadelphia?" He smiled, clearly used to this level of attention. "Productive, thank you, Candace. How have you been?" She laughed, a high-pitched giggle that sounded forced. "Oh, keeping busy. Can I get you a champagne before takeoff? I remember you prefer the Moet." He nodded appreciatively. "You have an excellent memory." Candace beamed. "Only for our best passengers." As she walked toward first class to deliver Mr. Pemberton's champagne, Candace passed Vivienne's seat. Vivienne was already settled in, reading her newspaper, the picture of quiet dignity. Candace's eyes swept over her dismissively at first, then snagged on something. The purple velvet pouch sitting in the seat pocket. For just a moment, Candace's steps slowed. Her gaze lingered on that pouch, visible just above the edge of the seat pocket. Something flickered across her face. Calculation. Curiosity. Want. She continued walking, but her mind was working. After delivering the champagne and fawning over Mr. Pemberton for another minute, Candace returned to the galley and pulled out the passenger manifest on her tablet. She scrolled through the first-class passenger list, her finger stopping on seat 3A. Vivienne Cole. That name. Where had she heard that name before? Cole. She frowned, trying to place it, but came up empty. Just another passenger. Just another old black woman who probably got upgraded using miles or got the seat as a gift from family. Candace had already decided Vivienne didn't belong there, not really, not the way Mr. Pemberton belonged there. The plane finished boarding. The captain's voice came over the intercom with the standard welcome message. Flight attendants took their jump seats for takeoff. But Candace's mind kept drifting back to that purple velvet pouch. She had seen the way Vivienne had handled it before tucking it away, the carefulness that suggested valuable contents. Jewelry, probably. Maybe expensive jewelry. And it was just sitting there in a seat pocket, unattended, easy to access. An opportunity. A temptation. Candace had been struggling financially for months, credit card debt piling up, a car payment she could barely afford. She wasn't a bad person, she told herself. She just needed a break. Just one piece of good luck. The plane lifted off, climbing through the clouds over Philadelphia. Zara pressed her face against the window in row 32, watching the city shrink below her. Vivienne dozed peacefully in first class, her velvet pouch inches away from her, trusting that she was safe. And Candace sat in her jump seat, already planning her next move, convincing herself that what she was about to do wasn't really stealing. It was just borrowing from someone who probably had plenty to spare. The airplane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And the real story was about to begin. 45 minutes into the flight, the plane had reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The cabin had settled into that familiar rhythm of a long flight. Some passengers read books or magazines, others watched movies on their personal screens, a few worked on laptops, and many had simply closed their eyes to sleep away the hours. In seat 3A, Vivienne Cole was one of those sleeping passengers, her head resting comfortably against the cushioned headrest, a thin airline blanket draped across her lap and chest. Her breathing was deep and even, the kind of sleep that comes from decades of comfortable travel and the peace of mind that comes with a life well lived. She had no reason to worry. She was in first class on a reputable airline, surrounded by other passengers, attended by professional crew members. Her jewelry was exactly where she had left it, just inches away in the seat pocket in front of her. Or so she thought. The cabin lights had been dimmed for passenger comfort, creating an atmosphere of quiet tranquility. That's when Candace's voice came over the intercom, artificially cheerful and professional. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now be starting our beverage service in the first-class cabin. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let us know. The announcement was standard, routine, the kind of thing passengers heard on every flight and barely registered. But this announcement was different. This announcement was the setup for a crime. Candace emerged from the forward galley pushing the beverage cart, her smile fixed in place like a mask. She moved down the aisle slowly, stopping at each row to take drink orders. Orange juice for the businessman in 1C. Coffee, black, no sugar, for the woman in 2A. Sparkling water with lime for Mr. Pemberton in 2D, delivered with an extra bright smile and a comment about the lovely weather in Boston, their destination. She was the picture of professionalism, attentive and courteous, everything a first-class flight attendant should be. But her eyes kept darting to seat 3A, where Vivienne slept peacefully, unaware that danger was approaching with every squeak of the beverage cart's wheels. Candace reached row 3 and stopped. She positioned the cart slightly to the side and looked down at Vivienne's sleeping form. The blanket rose and fell gently with each breath. Vivienne's face was relaxed, peaceful, the face of someone who felt completely safe. Candace's voice took on a softer tone, as if she were genuinely concerned about this passenger's comfort. Huh? Would you like anything to drink? No response. Vivienne was deep in sleep. Candace tried once more, slightly louder. Oh. Still nothing. Perfect. Candace's eyes swept the cabin with practiced casualness. The passenger in 3B was absorbed in his laptop, spreadsheet numbers reflecting in his reading glasses. Across the aisle, a woman was watching a movie with headphones on, completely engrossed. Behind her, a couple was having a quiet conversation, paying no attention to the flight attendant doing her job. Everyone was distracted, occupied, lost in their own worlds at 35,000 feet. The timing couldn't have been better. Candace leaned over Vivienne, ostensibly to adjust the blanket that had slipped slightly off her shoulder. Her movements were careful, gentle, the movements of a caring flight attendant making sure a passenger was comfortable. But her right hand, the hand hidden from view by her own body and the angle of the cart, moved with entirely different purpose. Her fingers slipped into the seat pocket in front of Vivienne, past the safety card, past the airline magazine, until they closed around soft velvet. The purple pouch. She felt the weight of it, the satisfying heaviness that confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't costume jewelry. This was the real thing. In one fluid motion, so quick it would have been easy to miss even if someone had been watching, Candace pulled the velvet pouch from the seat pocket and slipped it into the deep inner pocket of her uniform vest. The entire theft took less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds to steal something irreplaceable. 3 seconds to violate the trust of a sleeping woman who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space where Candace thought she didn't belong. Candace straightened up, smoothed down Vivienne's blanket with a gentle pat, and moved on to the next row as if absolutely nothing had happened. She continued down the aisle, taking more drink orders, smiling, chatting, playing her role perfectly. But if you had been watching closely, you might have noticed something off. Her smile was a fraction too tight. Her hand went to her vest pocket twice, pressing against it as if to confirm the pouch was still there, still hidden, still hers now. When she reached the end of first class and turned the cart around to head back to the galley, she allowed herself a small exhale of relief. She had done it. No one had seen. No one would ever know. The jewelry was hers now, and she could pawn it in Boston for enough money to solve at least some of her financial problems. She wasn't a bad person, she reminded herself again. She was just someone doing what she needed to do to survive. But as Candace pushed the cart back toward the galley, she encountered Rhonda coming from the economy section. Rhonda, with her kind eyes and genuine smile, the flight attendant who actually cared about passengers rather than just tolerating them. Rhonda noticed immediately that something was off. Candace's face was flushed, a light sheen of sweat visible on her forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. Her hands gripped the cart handles a bit too tightly, knuckles almost white. "Hey, Candace, you okay?" Rhonda asked, her voice carrying genuine concern. "You look a little stressed." It was an innocent question, a co-worker checking on another co-worker. But Candace reacted as if she'd been accused of something. Her head snapped toward Rhonda, eyes flashing with sudden anger. "I'm fine. Why don't you focus on your section? Economy needs attention. That's your job, remember?" The words came out sharp, harsh, completely disproportionate to Rhonda's simple question. Rhonda blinked, taken aback by the hostility. I was just asking if you were, but Candace cut her off. I don't need you asking me anything. Do your job, Rhonda. Let me do mine. She pushed past with the cart, leaving Rhonda standing in the aisle, confused and a little hurt. Rhonda watched Candace disappear into the galley, a frown creasing her forehead. That reaction wasn't normal. Something was definitely wrong. But Rhonda had no idea just how wrong things were about to get. An hour into the flight, Vivienne began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the dim cabin lighting. She blinked a few times, orienting herself, remembering where she was. The plane. Flight to Boston. Her granddaughter's graduation. She stretched slightly in her seat, working out a small kink in her neck from sleeping at an awkward angle. She glanced at her watch, or rather, she glanced at her wrist where her watch should have been, but her wrist was bare. That's right, she had taken off all her jewelry before the flight. Time to put it back on now that she was awake. Vivienne reached down to the seat pocket in front of her, her fingers expecting to find the familiar softness of velvet. But they found only the stiff safety card and the glossy pages of the airline magazine. She frowned slightly, her fingers searching more thoroughly. Nothing. Confusion flickered across her face. Had she put the pouch somewhere else? She checked the other seat pocket on the other side of her seat. Empty except for more airline literature. Her confusion was beginning to shift into something else, something that made her stomach tighten. Vivienne sat up straighter, pushing the blanket off her lap. She looked down at the floor around her feet, thinking maybe the pouch had somehow fallen. Nothing but the pristine first-class carpet. She bent down as far as her 73-year-old body would allow, checking under the seat in front of her. Nothing. She checked under her own seat, running her hand along the floor. Nothing. Her heart was beating faster now, a sick feeling growing in her chest. She checked her purse, even though she knew she hadn't put the pouch in there. She unzipped every compartment, dumped the contents onto her lap. Wallet, reading glasses, tissues, medication, phone, breath mints. No purple velvet pouch. No diamond earrings. No gold bracelet. No locket with Thomas's picture inside. Vivienne's hands started to shake. This couldn't be happening. She had been so careful. She always put her jewelry in the seat pocket. Always. It was her routine, followed religiously for 40 years of air travel. She pressed the call button above her seat once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, her finger jabbing at it with increasing urgency. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Had she forgotten to pack the jewelry this morning? No, impossible, she distinctly remembered placing each piece in the pouch. Had it fallen out of the seat pocket during takeoff? Unlikely, the pouch had a drawstring pulled tight. Had someone taken it while she slept? The thought made her feel sick, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Rhonda appeared within moments, her expression concerned at the rapid call button pressing. Yes, how can I help you? Her voice was warm, attentive. Vivienne looked up at her, and Rhonda could see the distress written clearly on this elegant woman's face. My jewelry is missing, Vivienne said, her voice controlled but strained. I had a velvet pouch with 3 pieces of jewelry in this seat pocket, and now it's gone. Rhonda's expression turned serious immediately. She didn't dismiss this as a misunderstanding or suggest that Vivienne had made a mistake. She took it at face value, which Vivienne appreciated more than Rhonda could know. Let me help you look, Rhonda said, crouching down to check under the seats herself. She was thorough, checking places Vivienne had already searched, looking in crevices between seats, even checking the overhead bin in case someone had mistakenly moved it there. Nothing. Can you describe the items for me? Rhonda asked, pulling out a small notepad. Vivienne took a steadying breath and began listing them. Diamond stud earrings, approximately 2 carats total weight, set in platinum. A gold bracelet, 18 carat, quite heavy, probably worth around $8,000. And a gold locket. Her voice caught slightly on the last item. An antique gold locket with the initials VC engraved on the front. It contains a photograph of my late husband and myself. It was my mother's locket, given to her by my father in 1952. It's been in my family for over 70 years. It's irreplaceable. Rhonda wrote everything down, noting the emotion in Vivienne's voice when she described the locket. This wasn't just about money or expensive jewelry. This was about family, history, love, memory. I'm going to inform the lead flight attendant immediately, Rhonda assured her. We'll figure out what happened to your jewelry, Mrs. She glanced at her passenger list. Mrs. Cole. We'll find it. Rhonda headed toward the galley to find Candace, and Vivienne sat back in her seat, trying to keep her composure. She had faced down hostile boardrooms, navigated through decades of discrimination in a male-dominated industry, built a billion-dollar company from nothing. She could handle this. But the thought of losing Thomas's picture, the last tangible connection to mornings when she would open that locket and see his young face smiling back at her, that thought made her eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall. Moments later, Candace appeared at her seat, and Vivienne could immediately sense the shift in energy. Where Rhonda had been concerned and empathetic, Candace radiated something else entirely. Skepticism. Dismissiveness. Something that made Vivienne's spine straighten defensively. I understand you're missing some items. Candace's tone was professional on the surface, but underneath it carried a subtle condescension that Vivienne had learned to recognize over 73 years of being a black woman in America. Yes, my jewelry, Vivienne replied evenly. A velvet pouch containing 3 valuable pieces. It was in my seat pocket, and now it's gone. Candace's eyebrows rose in a way that suggested she thought Vivienne was being dramatic. Are you sure you even brought jewelry with you? Sometimes when we're packing quickly, we think we've packed things we haven't. Maybe you left it at your hotel in Philadelphia? The suggestion hung in the air like an insult. Vivienne's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm and measured. Young lady, I've been traveling for 4 decades. I know exactly what I packed. I removed my jewelry after boarding and placed it in a velvet pouch in this seat pocket right here. She pointed to the offending pocket. I did not leave it at a hotel. I did not forget to pack it. It was here, and now it's not. Candace crossed her arms, her body language defensive, closed off. We can't just accuse passengers of theft without evidence. Are you certain you can afford jewelry valuable enough to worry about? The question landed like a slap. The implication was clear. Did this black woman really own expensive jewelry, or was she making things up for attention? Vivienne's face hardened, her eyes going cold in a way that would have made her corporate competitors recognize they had crossed a line. This wasn't just about missing jewelry anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and the assumption that she didn't belong in first class, that she didn't deserve to be believed, that her word wasn't good enough. I need to speak to the captain, Vivienne said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. But Candace didn't flinch. The captain is busy flying the plane. I'm sure your items will turn up. These things happen when people are forgetful. Perhaps you should retrace your steps mentally, think about the last time you actually saw these items. If you're as angry as I am about how Vivienne is being treated right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can see what happens next. And drop a comment below. What would you do if you were a passenger watching this unfold? Would you speak up? Other first-class passengers were starting to notice the commotion. Heads turned, conversations quieted. The businessman in 3B glanced over with mild interest. The couple across the aisle stopped talking and watched. And Mr. Pemberton, Candace's favorite passenger, decided to insert himself into the situation. Candace is right, he offered, his tone gentle but patronizing. Sometimes we misplace things and don't realize it. I'm sure you'll find your jewelry was never on the plane to begin with. Vivienne turned to look at him, and then at Candace, and then at all the watching faces around her. She could feel it, that familiar sensation of being judged, measured, found wanting simply because of the color of her skin. But Vivienne Cole had not built a $4 billion aerospace company by backing down when people underestimated her. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, clear, and carried the weight of absolute conviction. I did not misplace a velvet pouch containing 3 pieces of gold and diamond jewelry. Someone took it while I was sleeping. That is theft, and I expect this airline to take it seriously. The word theft seemed to electrify the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer just a lost item situation. This was an accusation. Candace's face flushed with anger and something else, something that might have been fear if you looked closely enough. I understand you're upset, but making unfounded accusations is serious. We have security protocols for situations like this. Vivienne met her eyes. Then I suggest you follow those protocols. Check the security footage. Question the crew. Do whatever you need to do. But do not stand there and suggest I'm confused or forgetful or lying. Candace's mouth tightened into a thin line. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only Vivienne could hear, but her words carried venom. Perhaps you should check with your people in the back of the plane. Maybe someone from economy came up here while you were sleeping. You know how that can be. The implication was crystal clear. Your people. Economy. The suggestion that theft was more likely to come from the back of the plane where people who looked like Vivienne sat, rather than from someone like Candace herself. Rhonda, who had been standing a few feet away listening to this entire exchange, felt her stomach turn. She had witnessed microaggressions before, had experienced them herself countless times, but this was blatant. This was cruel. And it was happening to a passenger who deserved better, who deserved to be believed and helped, not dismissed and insulted. Candace turned and walked back toward the galley, but not before stopping to whisper to another flight attendant, a younger white woman who looked uncomfortable with whatever was being said. Rhonda was close enough to hear Candace's words, probably costume jewelry anyway. Always looking for attention, these people. Making a scene over nothing. Rhonda's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to say something, wanted to defend Vivienne, wanted to call out Candace's behavior. But she was new, still in her probationary period, and Candace had the power to make her life miserable or even cost her this job. So Rhonda did what so many people do when witnessing injustice. She stayed silent, hating herself for it, but staying silent nonetheless. Vivienne sat back down in her seat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She stared straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see how much this had shaken her. It wasn't just about the jewelry, though the locket's loss felt like losing Thomas all over again. It was about being dismissed, being disbelieved, being treated as if her word meant nothing simply because of who she was. 73 years old, and this still happened. Successful beyond most people's wildest dreams, and this still happened. It never really stopped, did it? Back in row 32, Zara Winters shifted in her seat. She had been reading her astronomy book, but her concentration had been broken by the need to use the bathroom. She glanced at her mother, Simone, who had fallen asleep with her head against the window, exhausted from her conference. Zara unbuckled her seatbelt quietly, not wanting to wake her mother, and slipped out into the aisle. She was a responsible kid, independent, used to doing things on her own. The bathroom wasn't far, just toward the back of the plane. She could manage. Zara made her way down the narrow economy aisle, stepping carefully over feet and bags, excusing herself politely as she passed other passengers. She reached the lavatory, waited for it to become available, and then took her turn. When she emerged, she decided to walk back through first class instead of through the galley. It was faster, and she was curious. She had never really looked closely at first class before, had only glimpsed it briefly when boarding. As Zara walked through the curtain separating first class from economy, she immediately noticed the difference. Bigger seats, more space, fancier everything. But she also noticed something else: voices. Raised voices. A woman's voice, older, trying to stay calm but clearly upset. Zara slowed her steps, her natural curiosity overriding her intention to walk straight back to her seat. She heard fragments of conversation as she passed slowly through the cabin. My jewelry is missing. Velvet pouch in the seat pocket. Irreplaceable locket with my husband's picture. The voice belonged to an elderly black woman in a purple suit, and Zara could see the distress on her face even from several rows away. The woman was talking to a flight attendant, a younger black woman who was listening intently and writing things down in a notepad. Zara continued walking but kept listening. She heard the older woman describe her jewelry in detail: diamond earrings, gold bracelet, and most importantly, a gold locket that had been her mother's, that contained a photo of her late husband. The way the woman's voice broke slightly when she talked about the locket made Zara's chest tighten. It reminded her so much of her own grandmother, the way Grandma used to hold her precious things with such care, the way certain objects carried entire lifetimes of memory and love. Zara walked past seat 3A, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Vivienne's. What Zara saw in those eyes stopped her in her tracks. Pain. Frustration. And something else, tears that the older woman was fighting hard not to let fall. Vivienne looked at this little girl walking past, this child who was really looking at her, really seeing her, and for a second their shared understanding passed between them. Zara had lost her grandmother less than a year ago. She knew what it felt like to lose something precious, something that connected you to a person you loved who was no longer there. Zara forced herself to keep walking, but her mind was racing. Someone had taken that woman's jewelry. Someone had stolen something irreplaceable while she slept, vulnerable and trusting. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And the way the flight attendant with the blonde hair had been talking to her, Zara had caught some of that conversation too as she passed, the dismissive tone, the subtle suggestions that the woman was confused or lying. That wasn't right either. Zara made it back to row 32 and slid into her seat next to her mother, who was still sleeping peacefully. But Zara couldn't focus on her book anymore. She stared at the pages without seeing the words, her mind replaying what she had seen and heard. That woman's face. Those tears she was trying to hide. The locket with the husband's picture inside, gone forever unless someone found it. Unless someone helped her. Zara's fingers traced the worn cover of her astronomy book, the book her grandmother had given her 2 months before she died. Grandma had written an inscription inside the front cover, "To my brilliant Zara, who will touch the stars one day. Never stop reaching. Never stop believing. And never be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when you're the smallest person in the room." Zara had read those words 100 times, but they felt particularly relevant right now. She turned to her mother, who was just starting to stir from her nap. "Mom?" Zara's voice was quiet but insistent. Simone blinked her eyes open, yawning. "Him? What is it, baby?" Zara looked at her mother seriously, that expression that always made Simone realize her daughter was thinking about something important. "Mom, what do you do when you see someone being treated unfairly?" Simone was still half asleep, but the question registered through the fog. It was the kind of question Zara asked sometimes, usually after seeing something that troubled her. Simone reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Zara's ear. "You stand up for what's right, baby. Always. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She yawned again, her eyes already starting to close. "Why do you ask?" But Zara didn't answer. She just nodded and turned back to face forward, her hands clasped in her lap. Her mother drifted back to sleep within seconds, unaware that her daughter had just made a decision. A decision that would change everything. Zara didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew she couldn't just sit here and do nothing. That woman needed help. That woman deserved to have someone believe her, someone stand up for her, someone fight for what was right. And if the adults weren't going to do it, then maybe an 8-year-old girl who loved the stars and missed her grandmother and knew the difference between right and wrong would have to be the one to act. Zara's heart was pounding, but not from fear. From purpose. From determination. From the same courage that had made her grandmother so proud. She might only be 8 years old, but Grandma had always said that bravery has nothing to do with size. Zara unbuckled her seatbelt once more and stood up. This time, she wasn't going to the bathroom. This time, she was going to find out the truth. Zara stood up from her seat in row 32 for the 3rd time that flight, and this time her mother actually woke up enough to notice. Simone blinked at her daughter, confused. "Again, baby? Are you feeling okay? Is your stomach upset?" Zara shook her head, her expression serious in that way that made her look older than her 8 years. "No, Mom. I just need to go again. I'll be right back." Simone was too tired to question it further. She nodded, already letting her eyes drift closed again. "Okay, be careful. Stay in the aisle." But Zara had no intention of going to the bathroom. She had a mission now, a purpose that made her small heart beat faster with a mixture of nervousness and determination. As she walked toward the front of the plane, her steps were slower this time, more deliberate. She wasn't just passing through. She was observing. Her grandmother used to tell her that the best scientists were the ones who noticed things other people missed, the tiny details that revealed the bigger truth. Zara had always been good at noticing things. Today, that skill was about to change everything. She walked through the curtain into first class, her eyes scanning the cabin carefully. Most passengers were still occupied with their own activities, reading or sleeping or watching movies. The older woman in the purple suit, Mrs. Cole, was sitting in her seat staring straight ahead, her face composed but her eyes carrying a sadness that made Zara's chest hurt. But Zara's attention wasn't on the passengers right now. She was looking for the flight attendant with the blonde hair. The one who had been so dismissive. The one Zara's instincts told her was hiding something. Zara spotted her near the galley area, partially obscured by the beverage cart. Candace was standing with her back to the cabin, and even from a distance, Zara could see that something was wrong with her body language. The flight attendant's shoulders were hunched, tense, and her hand kept going to her vest pocket, touching it, pressing against it, as if checking that something was still there. It was the nervous gesture of someone who had something to hide, and Zara recognized it immediately. She had seen that same gesture from her classmate Tommy when he had taken someone's favorite pencil and was trying to act like he hadn't. Zara needed to get closer, but she couldn't just walk up to the galley without a reason. So she did what any smart 8-year-old would do, she found an excuse. She walked a few steps past the galley area, then crouched down as if to tie her shoe. Her shoe was actually a Velcro sneaker that didn't need tying, but no one watching would know that. She fumbled with the Velcro strap, taking her time, all while keeping her eyes on Candace through her peripheral vision. And that's when she saw it. Candace, thinking she was alone and unobserved, reached into the inner pocket of her vest. The same pocket she had been touching compulsively. Her hand emerged holding something purple and soft. A velvet pouch. Even from several feet away, Zara could see it clearly. Candace glanced around nervously, then quickly opened the drawstring and looked inside. The movement was fast, furtive, guilty. She was checking to make sure the contents were still there, her fingers touching whatever was inside before she pulled the drawstring tight again and shoved the pouch deeper into her pocket, pushing it down as far as it would go. Zara's eyes widened. That was it. That was the purple velvet pouch that Mrs. Cole had been talking about. The one with her grandmother's locket and her other jewelry. The one that had been stolen while she slept. And it was in the flight attendant's pocket. The flight attendant who had suggested Mrs. Cole was confused, forgetful, maybe even lying. The flight attendant who had implied that Mrs. Cole didn't really belong in first class. And all along, she had been the thief. She had taken it. She had it right now, hidden in her uniform like it belonged to her. Zara must have made a sound, or maybe her staring was too obvious, because Candace suddenly turned and looked directly at her. Their eyes met, and Zara saw the flash of panic cross the flight attendant's face before it hardened into anger. Candace's voice came out sharp and hostile, all pretense of professional courtesy gone. What are you looking at? Get back to your seat. She took a step toward Zara, her body language aggressive, trying to intimidate this child who had seen too much. But Zara didn't scare easily. Her grandmother had taught her that bullies relied on fear, and the way to disarm a bully was to stay calm and speak the truth. So Zara straightened up from her fake shoe tying, looked Candace directly in the eye, and asked in a clear, innocent voice, "I was just wondering if you found that lady's jewelry yet." The question landed like a bomb. Candace's face went through a rapid series of changes: shock, panic, fury. Her hand instinctively went to her vest pocket again, pressing against the hidden pouch, before she realized what she was doing and jerked her hand away. "This doesn't concern you, little girl." Her voice was low, threatening, the kind of voice adults use when they're trying to scare children into compliance. "Go sit down before I call your parents and have you removed from this section. You don't belong up here." There it was again. You don't belong up here. The same dismissiveness, the same assumption that certain people didn't deserve to be in certain spaces. Zara had heard those words directed at Mrs. Cole, and now they were being directed at her. Because she was from economy. Because she was a child. Because she was black. Zara understood all of this on an instinctive level, even if she couldn't have articulated it in adult terms. She understood that Candace thought she could bully her into silence the same way she had tried to silence Mrs. Cole. But Zara also understood something else: she had seen the truth. She knew where the jewelry was. And that knowledge was power, even if she was only 8 years old and barely 4 feet tall. So she nodded slowly, as if accepting Candace's order, and walked away. But her mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other like the stars in the galaxy she loved to study. She had evidence now. She had seen the pouch with her own eyes. But what was she supposed to do with that information? Who would believe an 8-year-old girl over a flight attendant who had worked for the airline for 15 years? Zara walked back through first class, past Mrs. Cole's seat. She glanced at the older woman one more time and saw that she had her eyes closed, but tears were silently streaming down her face. Tears for the locket she thought she would never see again. Tears for the photograph of her husband that she thought was lost forever. Tears for being dismissed and disrespected and disbelieved. Seeing those tears made something harden in Zara's chest, made her resolve strengthen into something unbreakable. She returned to row 32 and sat down next to her still sleeping mother. She pulled out her astronomy book and opened it, but she wasn't reading a single word. Her eyes stared at the page while her mind worked through the problem like it was one of the complex math puzzles she loved to solve. She had information. She had witnessed a crime. But she was a child, and the criminal was an adult in a position of authority. The normal rules said she should tell an adult and let them handle it. But what if the adults didn't believe her? What if they dismissed her the way they had dismissed Mrs. Cole? Zara thought about her grandmother, about the inscription in the book she was holding. Never be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when you're the smallest person in the room. Well, she was definitely the smallest person on this airplane. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that she knew the truth and she had the courage to speak it. Her mother had said it just an hour ago, barely awake but still imparting wisdom. You stand up for what's right, baby. Always. Even when it's hard. This was hard. This was scary. But it was also right. 20 minutes later, Zara saw her opportunity. Rhonda, the kind flight attendant who had been taking Mrs. Cole seriously from the beginning, was making her way through economy with the beverage cart, asking passengers what they wanted to drink. Zara waited until Rhonda was just 2 rows away, then unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped into the aisle. When Rhonda reached her row, Zara spoke up before the flight attendant could ask about beverages. "Excuse me, Zara's voice was polite but serious. Rhonda looked down at her with a warm smile. "Yes, sweetheart? Would you like some apple juice? Ginger ale?" But Zara shook her head. "No, thank you. I need to tell you something important. I think I know what happened to that lady's jewelry." Rhonda's smile faltered slightly. She glanced at Simone, who was awake now and looking at her daughter with confusion. "Zara, what are you talking about?" Simone asked. But Zara kept her eyes on Rhonda. "The lady in first class. The one whose jewelry was stolen. I know what happened to it." Rhonda's expression shifted from warm friendliness to something more guarded, more skeptical. She had a soft spot for kids, always had, but this was a serious accusation and she couldn't just take a child's word without consideration. "Sweetheart, that's a grown-up problem. You don't need to worry about it. I'm sure everything will work out." She started to move the cart forward, clearly intending to continue her beverage service and dismiss this as a child's overactive imagination. But Zara stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to gently touch Rhonda's arm. "Please. I saw something." I saw the flight attendant with the blonde hair put a purple bag in her pocket. The words came out in a rush, urgent, desperate to be heard before Rhonda could walk away. Rhonda froze. Her entire body went still, her hand gripping the handle of the beverage cart so tightly her knuckles went white. She turned slowly to look down at Zara, and now her expression was completely different. No more warm smile. No more dismissiveness. Her eyes were sharp, focused, searching Zara's face for any sign of fabrication or confusion. "You saw Candace with a velvet pouch." Her voice was quiet, careful, but there was an edge to it. Zara nodded emphatically. "Yes, I saw her in the galley." She pulled it out of her pocket and looked inside it. Then when she saw me watching, she shoved it back in her pocket really fast and told me to go back to my seat. She looked scared. That's how people look when they're hiding something wrong. Like when my friend Tommy took someone's pencil and tried to pretend he didn't, he had that same look. Rhonda stared at this 8-year-old girl who spoke with such clarity, such certainty, such unexpected wisdom. She crouched down to Zara's eye level, bringing her face close so they could talk without other passengers easily overhearing. The beverage cart was temporarily abandoned in the aisle. This was more important than drinks. "Zara, that's a very serious thing to say. You understand that, right? If you're telling me you saw Candace, the lead flight attendant, with stolen jewelry, that's accusing her of a crime." Zara's eyes didn't waver. "I know it's serious. That's why I have to tell you. Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" "Yes, I'm sure." It was a purple velvet bag, just like the lady described. "And Candace looked guilty when she saw me watching. Really guilty." Simone, who had been listening to this entire exchange with growing alarm, leaned forward. "Zara, baby, what is going on? What lady? What jewelry?" But Rhonda held up a hand gently, asking Simone to wait just a moment. Her eyes were still locked on Zara's, measuring, evaluating, deciding. This child was not lying. Rhonda had worked with enough people, including enough children, to know when someone was telling the truth. And everything about Zara's demeanor, her body language, her steady eye contact, her specific details, all of it screamed honesty. Zara spoke again, her voice softer now but no less determined. "My mom says I have to speak up when I see something wrong. Even if it's scary. Even if people might not believe me. That lady is crying because someone took her grandmother's locket with her husband's picture in it. She's crying because nobody believes her. I saw who took it. I have to speak up. That's what my grandma would have wanted me to do." And there it was. The moral clarity of a child who had been raised right, who had been taught that courage meant standing up for others even when you were afraid. Rhonda felt something shift in her chest, a mixture of admiration for this brave little girl and fury at Candace for putting them all in this position. Rhonda had suspected something was off about Candace's behavior earlier, the way she had been so dismissive of Mrs. Cole, so defensive when questioned. And if this child was telling the truth, and Rhonda's gut said she was, then Candace had stolen from a passenger and then gaslit that passenger into thinking she was confused or forgetful. Rhonda made a decision. She stood up, her jaw set with determination. "Come with me," she said to Zara. Then she looked at Simone. I need to borrow your daughter for just a few minutes. I promise I'll bring her right back. Simone looked uncertain, protective, confused about what was happening. Where are you taking her? What is this about? Rhonda's voice was gentle but firm. Your daughter may have witnessed something very important. I need her to tell someone what she saw. She's not in any trouble. In fact, she might be the bravest person on this plane. Zara looked at her mother, silently asking permission. Simone searched her daughter's face and saw absolute conviction there. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she trusted her daughter. She had raised Zara to be truthful, observant, and courageous. If Zara said she had seen something important, then she had. Okay, Simone said quietly. But I'm coming with you. Rhonda nodded. Of course. Rhonda led Zara and Simone through the curtain into first class, and immediately heads turned. An economy passenger walking through first class was unusual enough. An economy child being escorted by a flight attendant was definitely unusual. But Rhonda walked with purpose, heading straight for seat 3A where Vivienne Cole sat with her eyes closed, her face a mask of controlled grief. Mrs. Cole? Rhonda's voice was gentle. Vivienne opened her eyes, and when she saw Rhonda standing there with a little black girl and her mother, confusion crossed her elegant features. Yes? Her voice was hoarse, tired from crying and from fighting to maintain her dignity in the face of disrespect. Rhonda took a breath. This was it. This was the moment that would either solve this problem or make it infinitely worse. Mrs. Cole, this young passenger says she has information about your jewelry. The words seemed to electrify the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen suddenly abandoned all pretense and turned to stare. The businessman in 3B looked up from his laptop. The couple across the aisle put down their magazines. Mr. Pemberton, who had been dozing, opened his eyes. All attention focused on this small girl who stood in the aisle, her hand holding her mother's hand tightly, but her spine straight and her chin up. Vivienne sat up straighter, hope and skepticism warring on her face. She had been dismissed by adults, told she was confused, made to feel like she was causing trouble over nothing. And now a child was claiming to have information? What did you see, sweetheart? Vivienne's voice was kind despite her distress. Zara took a small step forward, close enough to speak clearly so everyone could hear. Her voice, when it came out, was clear and steady, though inside she was terrified. I saw the flight attendant take your purple bag from her pocket. The one with blonde hair. The reaction was immediate. Audible gasps echoed through the first-class cabin. The businessman's mouth fell open. The couple across the aisle exchanged shocked looks. Mr. Pemberton sat forward in his seat. And Vivienne's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and renewed hope. But before anyone could respond, a sharp voice cut through the cabin like a knife. What is going on here? Candace emerged from the galley, her face already flushed with anger before she even fully understood the situation. Rhonda, why is an economy passenger in first class? You know the rules about. Rhonda cut her off, her voice stronger than Candace had ever heard it. This child says she saw you with Mrs. Cole's jewelry pouch. The words hung in the air like an accusation carved in stone. The entire first-class cabin went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. All eyes swiveled to Candace, watching her face, watching her reaction, reading her body language. And what they saw was telling. Candace's face went from flushed to bright red, a deep crimson that spread from her neck to her hairline. Her mouth opened and closed several times before words finally came out, and when they did, they were sharp with defensive anger. That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. This is what happens when you let children run wild on planes. She's lying. She's a child making up stories for attention. But Zara didn't back down. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let herself be bullied into silence now. Her grandmother wouldn't have. Her mother wouldn't have. And she wouldn't either. She looked directly at Candace and spoke with a calmness that belied her 8 years. I'm not lying. I saw you in the galley checking inside a purple velvet bag. Then you put it in your pocket. The inside pocket on the left side of your vest. You looked scared when you saw me watching. Then you told me to go back to my seat and said I didn't belong up here. The specificity of the details was damning. The location of the pocket. The description of the bag. The recounting of Candace's own words. These weren't the vague accusations of a child seeking attention. These were the precise observations of someone who had witnessed exactly what she claimed to have witnessed. If this story is making your heart race right now, hit that subscribe button because you need to see how this confrontation ends. And tell me in the comments, Would you have had the courage to speak up if you were Zara? What would you have done differently? Candace's eyes darted around the cabin, looking for support, looking for someone to defend her, looking for an escape from the trap that was closing around her. But the passengers who had been so quick to dismiss Mrs. Cole's concerns were now looking at Candace with suspicion and dawning realization. Mr. Pemberton, who had earlier suggested that Vivienne had misplaced her jewelry, was now staring at Candace with narrowed eyes. The businessman in 3B had closed his laptop completely, giving this situation his full attention. The couple across the aisle were whispering to each other, phones already in their hands. Candace tried to regain control of the situation, her voice getting louder, more aggressive, trying to use volume and authority to overwhelm this child's quiet truth. You cannot seriously be believing a child over me. I have worked for this airline for 15 years. 15 years. I have an impeccable record. And you're going to take the word of some random kid who probably saw me checking my own personal items and is now making up stories. But Rhonda stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Zara, protective. Then it should be easy to prove, shouldn't it? Empty your pockets, Candace. If you have nothing to hide, show us. The challenge was clear, simple, direct. If Candace was innocent, she would have nothing to fear from emptying her pockets. But the look on her face, the way her hand instinctively moved to protect that inner vest pocket, the way her eyes went wide with trapped panic, all of it told a story that her words couldn't hide. Vivienne stood up from her seat, her full height and presence commanding attention. For the first time since this ordeal began, she looked less like a victim and more like the powerful woman she actually was. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of someone who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals. Empty your pockets. Now. Other passengers began to join in, their voices creating a chorus of demand. Just show us your pockets. If you're innocent, prove it. Let's see what you've got. The tide had turned. Candace was no longer in control. The passengers had made their judgment, and they were on the side of the elderly black woman and the brave little black girl who dared to speak the truth. Candace stood there, trapped, her face a mask of fury and fear, her hand still hovering protectively over her vest pocket where a purple velvet pouch sat hidden, getting heavier by the second. And in that moment, everyone in first class knew. They knew she had taken it. They knew she had lied. They knew that this 8-year-old girl had seen what no one else had been brave enough or observant enough to catch. Zara stood her ground, her mother's hand gripping hers tightly, Rhonda standing protectively nearby, and Vivienne watching with tears of gratitude beginning to form in her eyes. The smallest person in the room had just become the most powerful. And the real confrontation was only beginning. Candace stood there in the aisle of first class, surrounded by accusing eyes, trapped by the words of an 8-year-old child, and for a moment she seemed to consider her options. Then she did what cornered people often do when they have no good defense, she laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive laugh that dripped with contempt and desperation. You're going to believe an 8-year-old over me? Are you serious right now? I've worked for this airline for 15 years. 15 years of impeccable service, and you're going to take the word of a child who doesn't even belong in this section. But Vivienne Cole was done being dismissed. She was done being polite. She was done allowing this woman to gaslight her and disrespect her. She rose from her seat with the grace and power of someone who had spent 73 years learning exactly when to be gentle and when to be firm. This was a time for firmness. She stood at her full height, looked Candace directly in the eye, and spoke with a voice that could have commanded armies. Empty your pockets. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand from a woman who had built a billion-dollar company by knowing when to push and when to hold her ground. And right now, Vivienne Cole was holding her ground like it was made of steel. Candace's laugh died in her throat. Her face hardened with defensive anger. I will do no such thing. This is harassment. This is absolutely inappropriate, and I'm going to report every single one of you for creating a hostile environment on this aircraft. You have no right to demand that I. Mr. Pemberton, the same passenger who had earlier sided with Candace and suggested that Vivienne had simply misplaced her jewelry, now interrupted with a voice full of doubt and growing certainty. Candace, if you have nothing to hide, just show them. Just empty your pockets and put this to rest. His tone had completely changed. Where before he had been dismissive of Vivienne's concerns, now he was looking at Candace with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent a career in business learning to read people, and what he was reading from Candace's body language was guilt written in bold letters. Other passengers began to join in, their voices creating a chorus of demand that filled the first-class cabin. Just empty your pockets. Show us you don't have anything. What are you afraid of? If you're innocent, prove it. The tide had completely turned. These same passengers who had been willing to dismiss an elderly black woman's concerns were now fully invested in seeing justice done, spurred on by the courage of a little girl and the growing certainty that something very wrong had happened here. Candace looked around wildly, searching for an ally, searching for an escape route, searching for any way out of this situation. But there was none. She was surrounded by passengers who had pulled out their phones, cameras pointed at her, recording every moment. She was trapped by her own lies and by the truth spoken by a child who had been brave enough to see what adults had missed. Finally, with her face flushed deep red and her hands shaking with rage and fear, Candace threw up her hands in theatrical exasperation. Fine. Fine. You want to humiliate me? You want to treat me like a criminal? Fine. I'll show you. Her voice was shrill now, the professional veneer completely cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. She reached into her uniform pockets with aggressive movements, pulling items out one by one and holding them up for everyone to see. A crumpled tissue. A ballpoint pen with the airline's logo. A tube of lip gloss. A small notepad where she kept passenger notes. She turned her outer pockets inside out dramatically, showing they were empty except for lint and a few receipts. See? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're all making me out to be a criminal because of a child's overactive imagination. She held her arms out wide, her pockets turned inside out, her face twisted in righteous indignation. Are you satisfied now? Are you happy? You've humiliated a 15-year veteran employee based on the word of a child who probably doesn't even understand what she thinks she saw. Candace was practically shouting now, her voice echoing through the cabin, her performance designed to overwhelm with volume what she couldn't defend with truth. But then, cutting through all that noise and bluster, came a small, quiet, steady voice. Zara, who had been standing silently beside her mother and Rhonda, spoke just 4 words that changed everything. Check your other pocket. Candace froze mid-gesture, her arms still outstretched, her mouth still open from her rant. What? The word came out strangled, barely a whisper. Zara's voice remained calm, factual, precise. The inside pocket on the left side of your vest. That's where you put the purple bag. The silence that followed those words was absolute. Every passenger in first class held their breath. Time seemed to slow down. Candace stood there like a statue, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly it was like watching a time-lapse. Shock, panic, rage, desperation, defeat. Her eyes went to that inner vest pocket, then jerked away as if burned. Her hand twitched toward it, then pulled back. She opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. The passengers erupted. Check the pocket she's talking about. The inside pocket. Show us. Open it. Their voices overlapped, creating a wall of sound that demanded truth, demanded justice, demanded an end to the lies. Rhonda stepped forward, her voice gentle but absolutely firm. Candace, please. It was the tone of someone who had already made up her mind about what she would find, someone who was giving a colleague one last chance to do the right thing before it got even worse. Candace stood there, trembling visibly now, her face going from red to pale white. Her breathing was rapid, shallow, the breathing of someone in full panic mode. The first-class cabin felt like a courtroom, with every passenger serving as jury, and they had already rendered their verdict. All that remained was the evidence. The pause stretched out, long and terrible. Candace's hand hovered near her vest, shaking like a leaf in a storm. Every second that passed was another nail in the coffin of her denials. If she had nothing to hide, she would have already opened that pocket and proven the child wrong. But she wasn't opening it. She couldn't open it. Because everyone in that cabin now knew, with absolute certainty, what she was hiding. Finally, with a movement that seemed to take all her remaining strength, Candace's trembling hand reached into the inner pocket of her vest. The pocket that Zara had specifically identified. The pocket she had so carefully avoided mentioning when she emptied all her other pockets. Her fingers disappeared into the fabric, and when they emerged, they were clutching something purple and soft. The velvet pouch. The collective gasp that went through the first-class cabin was like a physical force. Passengers leaned forward in their seats. Phones zoomed in to capture the moment. Someone whispered "Oh my God" in a voice full of shock and vindication. Vivienne's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and renewed pain at having been so thoroughly gaslit and dismissed. Candace stood there holding the pouch like it was evidence at a crime scene, which it essentially was. She stared at it as if she couldn't quite believe she was holding it, as if maybe this was all a nightmare she would wake up from. Her mouth opened and closed several times before words finally tumbled out, a desperate attempt to salvage a situation that was far beyond salvaging. I was going to return it. Her voice was small now, all the aggressive bluster gone, replaced with the pathetic pleading of someone caught red-handed. I found it on the floor. It must have fallen out of the seat pocket. I was keeping it safe. I was going to give it back, I was waiting for the right moment. I didn't want to disturb her while she was sleeping. The lies were so transparent, so obvious, that several passengers actually scoffed out loud. But it was Zara, once again, who delivered the killing blow with simple, undeniable logic. Her voice was quiet but clear, cutting through Candace's excuses like a knife through butter. Then why did you hide it in a secret pocket? And why did you tell Mrs. Cole she probably left it at the hotel? The questions hung in the air, unanswerable. Because there was no good answer. If Candace had truly found the jewelry and was keeping it safe, she would have immediately informed Vivienne. She would have announced it over the intercom. She would have placed it in a secure location and documented it properly. She certainly wouldn't have hidden it in an inner pocket of her uniform and then actively tried to convince the owner that she had never brought the jewelry on the plane in the first place. Candace's face crumpled. She had no response. No excuse. No way out. Rhonda stepped forward and gently but firmly took the velvet pouch from Candace's unresisting fingers. She turned and walked a few steps to Vivienne, holding out the pouch like it was something sacred. Vivienne reached out with shaking hands, her fingers closing around the soft velvet that she had thought she would never feel again. For a moment she just held it, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer of gratitude. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened the drawstring and looked inside. One by one, she pulled out her treasures. The diamond earrings, still sparkling under the cabin lights, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the seats. The heavy gold bracelet, solid and substantial, the weight of it familiar and comforting in her palm. And finally, most importantly, the gold locket. Vivienne held the locket up, and with hands that shook with emotion, she opened the delicate clasp. Inside, exactly where they had always been, were the tiny photographs. On one side, a young black woman with hope shining in her eyes, her wedding dress white and perfect, her smile radiant with love and future dreams. On the other side, a young black man in a sharp suit, his arm around that young woman, his face full of pride and adoration. Vivienne and Thomas, frozen in time at the beginning of their journey together, forever young, forever in love, forever hopeful about the life they would build. Tears streamed down Vivienne's face, and she didn't even try to hide them anymore. These weren't tears of grief or frustration. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion at having recovered something that could never be replaced. She held the locket to her chest, her eyes closed, and whispered something too quiet for anyone else to hear. But if you looked closely, you could see her lips forming the word Thomas. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom, stern and authoritative. Candace Hartwell, report to the cockpit immediately. The words were clipped, professional, but carried an unmistakable tone of barely controlled anger. A pilot doesn't usually get involved in cabin issues unless something serious has happened. And this was serious. This was theft. This was passenger safety being compromised. This was an employee bringing shame and legal liability to the entire airline. Rhonda spoke up, her voice steady and clear. I already called ahead while we were confronting her. The captain knows everything. The co-pilot is on his way back here now to escort her forward. Candace's head snapped toward Rhonda, betrayal written across her features. But Rhonda met her gaze without flinching. You stole from a passenger, Candace. You tried to gaslight her into thinking she was confused. You dismissed her, disrespected her, and would have gotten away with it if not for an 8-year-old child being more observant and braver than any of the adults on this plane. What did you expect me to do? And then, in that moment, Candace's mask finally and completely shattered. All the professionalism, all the fake politeness, all the carefully maintained facade of respectability fell away, revealing the ugliness that had been there all along. Her face twisted with venom, her voice dripping with racism that she no longer bothered to hide behind coded language. She knelt on the industrial carpet of first class, bringing herself to eye level with an 8-year-old girl, and reached out to gently take both of Zara's small hands in her own. The gesture was so full of humility, so full of genuine emotion, that several passengers felt fresh tears spring to their eyes. This wasn't a powerful woman condescending to a child. This was one human being honoring another, recognizing courage where she found it, regardless of age or size or status. What's your name, sweetheart? Vivienne's voice was soft, warm, thick with emotion but steady with purpose. Zara Winters. The little girl's voice was clear despite the enormity of what had just happened, despite being the center of attention in a cabin full of adults, despite everything. Vivienne smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Zara. That's a beautiful name. It means radiance in Arabic, did you know that? And you certainly lived up to it today. She squeezed Zara's hands gently. Zara, you gave me back more than jewelry today. You gave me back my husband's memory. You gave me back my dignity. You gave me back faith. Faith that there are still people in this world who see injustice and refuse to look away. Faith that courage isn't about being big or powerful, it's about being true and brave. Tears were streaming down Vivienne's face, but she was smiling through them, and her voice never wavered. What you did took more courage than most adults will ever have in their entire lives. You saw something wrong, and even though you were scared, even though you're just a child and no one would have blamed you for staying quiet, you spoke up. You stood up. You fought for someone you didn't even know. Vivienne paused, studying Zara's face with wonder. How old are you, Zara? 8. The simple answer, delivered matter-of-factly. Vivienne's smile widened even as more tears fell. 8 years old. When I was 8, I was afraid of my own shadow. I was afraid to raise my hand in class. I was afraid to speak up when other kids were mean to me. I was afraid of everything. She shook her head in amazement. But you stood up against injustice. You called out a thief. You defended a stranger. You spoke truth to power. At 8 years old, you did what I didn't learn to do until I was in my 20s. Vivienne paused, her eyes searching Zara's face with genuine curiosity. Do you know what you want to be when you grow up, Zara? Zara's face lit up in a way it hadn't throughout this entire ordeal. This was her passion, her dream, the thing that made her eyes shine and her voice fill with excitement. An astrophysicist. I want to study stars. I want to understand how the universe works. I want to maybe work for NASA someday, or help design spacecraft, or discover new planets, or, she stopped herself, suddenly shy, worried she had said too much, revealed too much enthusiasm. But Vivienne's reaction was the opposite of dismissive. Her face transformed with joy and recognition, as if she had just been given the most wonderful gift. Then you will, she said, her voice full of absolute certainty. I'm going to make sure of it. Before Zara could ask what that meant, Simone pushed her way through the small crowd that had formed. She had been standing at the edge of first class, watching everything unfold, her heart bursting with pride and love and overwhelming emotion at seeing her daughter's courage, at watching her baby girl stand up for what was right in a way that most adults never would. She dropped to her knees beside Vivienne and pulled Zara into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud. Simone's voice broke as she held her daughter, rocking her slightly the way she had when Zara was tiny. Your grandmother would be so proud too. You did exactly what she taught you to do. You stood up. You spoke up. You made it right. Zara hugged her mother back, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt the weight of what she had done. The fear she had pushed down, the nervousness she had ignored, the courage it had taken to stand in front of all these adults and accuse a flight attendant of theft, it all came rushing back, and suddenly she was just an 8-year-old girl who needed her mother. She buried her face in Simone's shoulder and let out a shaky breath. Vivienne watched this tender moment between mother and daughter, and it reminded her of her own mother, of the values that had been passed down through generations. Character. Integrity. Courage. Justice. These things mattered more than money, more than status, more than anything else in the world. And this little girl embodied all of them. Vivienne pulled out her wallet from her designer handbag and extracted a business card. It was elegant, simple, embossed with gold lettering. She handed it to Simone, who took it with a slightly confused expression, still holding Zara close. Mrs. Winters, I need your contact information. Your phone number, your email, your address. Because I meant what I said to your daughter. Vivienne's voice was all business now, the voice of someone used to making decisions and following through on them. Zara is going to study the stars, and I'm going to make sure nothing stands in her way. But before Simone could respond, before Vivienne could explain further, Mr. Pemberton's voice cut through the moment. He had been sitting in his seat, watching everything unfold, and something had been nagging at him. That name. Vivienne Cole. Where had he heard that name before? And then it hit him, and his face transformed with shock and recognition. Wait. His voice was loud enough that everyone in first class turned to look at him. Wait. Vivienne Cole? He stood up from his seat, his eyes wide. As in Cole Aerospace Technologies? Vivienne turned to look at him and nodded simply. Yes. The reaction in the first-class cabin was immediate and electric. Passengers who had been recording the emotional reunion between Vivienne and Zara suddenly started whispering to each other, pulling out their phones to Google the name, their faces registering shock as search results populated their screens. Cole Aerospace Technologies. One of the premier suppliers of aerospace components in the United States. Contracts with NASA, SpaceX, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. A company worth billions. And the woman they had watched be dismissed, disrespected, and robbed was the founder and owner. Vivienne saw the recognition dawning on faces around her and sighed softly. She had hoped to avoid this moment, had wanted to just be a grandmother flying home to see her granddaughter graduate, but perhaps this revelation was important. Perhaps Zara and Simone needed to understand who was making promises to them. She turned back to Zara, who was looking up at her with curious eyes, not yet understanding what Cole Aerospace Technologies meant. Vivienne smiled gently and began to explain in terms an 8-year-old who loved space could understand. Zara, do you know those rockets that SpaceX launches? The ones you've probably seen on TV, the ones that go up to the International Space Station. Zara nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up. My company makes some of the parts that go inside those rockets. The navigation systems, some of the computer components, pieces that help the rocket know where it's going and how to get there safely. Zara's mouth fell open. You make rocket parts. Vivienne laughed, a genuine sound of joy. Yes, sweetheart. I founded my company 4 to 5 years ago, back when people told me that a black woman had no business in aerospace engineering. They told me I should be a teacher or a nurse or a secretary. They told me I was dreaming too big. But I didn't listen to them. I kept pushing. I kept learning. I kept building. And now, Cole Aerospace Technologies is worth $4.2 billion. We employ over 3,000 people. We've helped put satellites in space, helped astronauts get to the space station, helped explore Mars. The passengers around them were absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Many of them were looking ashamed, realizing they had dismissed this woman, had assumed she didn't belong in first class, had sided with Candace's implications that Vivienne's jewelry was probably costume, that she was probably exaggerating, that she was probably causing drama over nothing. They had looked at her and made assumptions based on her age and her race, never imagining that she was one of the most successful aerospace entrepreneurs in American history. Mr. Pemberton spoke up again, his voice full of respect and contrition. Mrs. Cole, I owe you an enormous apology. I should have believed you immediately. I should have stood up for you. Instead, I dismissed your concerns and sided with. He couldn't even finish the sentence, too ashamed of his own prejudice. Vivienne looked at him with understanding rather than anger. You made assumptions. We all make assumptions. The question is what we do when we realize we were wrong. You're recognizing it now. That's what matters. She turned back to address the entire first-class cabin. I'm one of only 3 black women to have founded a billion-dollar aerospace company in this country. I've been doing this for 4 to 5 years. I'm still active as board chairwoman. I still go to the office. I still make decisions. I still fight for innovation and excellence every single day. She paused, her hand going unconsciously to her locket, which now hung safely around her neck where it belonged. I don't need recognition. I don't need people to know who I am or how much money I have or what I've accomplished. I just wanted to travel home in peace to see my granddaughter graduate from MIT with her degree in mechanical engineering. I wanted to sit in my seat, wear my mother's locket with my husband's picture inside, and think about how proud Thomas would be of our family. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But today reminded me why I started the Cole Foundation 15 years ago. I started it because I was once a little black girl who loved science and math and space, and everyone told me I couldn't do it. I started it because I know how many brilliant young minds are out there right now, being told they can't, being dismissed, being overlooked, being denied opportunities because of what they look like or where they come from or how much money their families have. Vivienne turned to Zara, her eyes shining with purpose. And today, I met an 8-year-old girl who proved that courage and character have nothing to do with age or size or power. They have everything to do with what's in your heart. Vivienne pulled out another business card, this one different from the first. This one had the Cole Foundation logo on it. She handed it to Simone, who was now crying so hard she could barely see straight. Mrs. Winters, the Cole Foundation provides full scholarships for exceptional young women pursuing STEM fields. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We cover everything. Tuition, books, room and board, research opportunities, internships, mentorship. Everything. From elementary school enrichment programs all the way through PhD if she wants it. We've sent young women to MIT, Stanford, Caltech, Georgia Tech. We've helped them become engineers, physicists, computer scientists, doctors, researchers. Vivienne's voice grew even more intense, more committed. Zara has just earned herself a lifetime scholarship. From right now, from this moment forward, through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, graduate school, whatever path her brilliant mind wants to take, the Cole Foundation will be there supporting her every step of the way. Simone couldn't speak. She couldn't find words. She was a single mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to make ends meet, who had always dreamed of giving her daughter every opportunity but knew the financial reality of what that would cost. She had been saving for Zara's college education since the day she was born, putting away what little she could, knowing it would never be enough for the kind of school Zara deserved. And now this woman, this incredible woman whom Zara had helped, was offering a full scholarship for life? She finally managed to choke out words through her tears. We can't accept, that's too much. But Vivienne held up a hand, gentle but firm. Yes, you can. And you will. Because your daughter did something extraordinary today. She saw injustice and she fought it. She stood up for someone she didn't know. She spoke truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. That's exactly the kind of character and courage that the Cole Foundation exists to reward and nurture. Vivienne turned to Zara, who was trying to process everything she was hearing. Zara, do you understand what this means? You can really study the stars. You can go to the best schools. You can have the best teachers. You can do internships at NASA or SpaceX or my company. You can have research opportunities. You can attend space camp and science programs and engineering workshops. You can become anything you want to become. An astrophysicist, just like you said. A rocket scientist. An astronaut. Anything. Zara's eyes were huge, filled with wonder and disbelief and dawning hope. You mean? I can really study the stars. Her voice was small, awed, as if she was afraid that saying it too loudly might break the spell. Vivienne smiled, tears streaming freely down her face now too. You can study anything your brilliant mind wants to study. And when you're ready, when you've finished your education and you're looking for where to apply all that knowledge, there's an internship waiting for you at Cole Aerospace Technologies. You can help design the rockets that will take humans to Mars. You can help build the satellites that will explore the edges of our solar system. The stars are yours, Zara. The universe is yours. And nothing will ever stand in your way again. The entire first-class cabin erupted in applause. It started with one person clapping, then another, then everyone. They stood from their seats, phones still recording, tears on many faces, applauding this 8-year-old girl who had shown more courage than all of them combined. They were applauding Vivienne's generosity. They were applauding justice being served. They were applauding the beautiful full-circle moment of courage being rewarded, of good triumphing over evil, of a child's bravery opening doors to dreams she had thought were impossible. Rhonda was crying openly, not even trying to hide it anymore. She pushed through the crowd and hugged both Vivienne and Zara, wrapping them in her arms. Thank you, she whispered to Zara. Thank you for being brave when I wasn't. Thank you for speaking up when I stayed quiet. You taught me something today. You taught all of us something. The businessman in 3B was wiping his eyes with his handkerchief. The couple across the aisle were holding each other, both crying. Mr. Pemberton was applauding so hard his hands hurt, trying to atone through the force of his clapping for his earlier dismissiveness. Every single person in that cabin had been changed by what they had witnessed. They would go home and tell this story. They would remember this day for the rest of their lives. They would remember the little girl who stood up, and the woman who recognized that courage and rewarded it in a way that would change a life forever. The plane landed in Boston 20 minutes later. As it taxied to the gate, passengers remained in their seats longer than usual, no one rushing to grab their bags and fight for position in the aisle. They were still processing, still absorbing, still changed by what had happened at 35,000 feet. But when the plane finally pulled up to the gate and the door opened, everyone got another surprise. News crews were waiting. Cameras and microphones and reporters eager to tell this story. Rhonda had called ahead, had contacted the media, had made sure that what happened on this flight wouldn't be swept under the rug or minimized or forgotten. Candace Hartwell was escorted off the plane first, in handcuffs, flanked by airport police. Her face was hidden, her head down, her career over, her reputation destroyed. The cameras captured every moment as she was led away. The airline had already released a statement condemning her actions, promising a full investigation, pledging to review all their hiring and training protocols, apologizing profusely to Vivienne Cole and every passenger on that flight. Then came Vivienne, walking out with dignity and grace, Zara holding one hand and Simone holding the other. The cameras went wild. Reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Cole, can you tell us what happened? Is it true a child discovered the theft? What are your plans moving forward? Vivienne stopped, still holding Zara's hand, and spoke directly to the cameras with the poise of someone who had given 1,000 interviews in her career. Today I was robbed, dismissed, and disrespected by someone who saw me as less than human because of the color of my skin. But today I was also saved, defended, and honored by an 8-year-old child who saw me as a person deserving of justice and dignity. Her name is Zara Winters, and she is the bravest person I have ever met. The Cole Foundation will be awarding her a full scholarship for life, and I will be personally mentoring her as she pursues her dream of becoming an astrophysicist. The reporters went wild with follow-up questions, but Vivienne just smiled and walked on, Zara and Simone beside her, toward whatever came next. 3 months later, on a bright sunny morning in Philadelphia, Zara stood in the headquarters of the Cole Foundation wearing her best dress, her hair in the same French braids her mother had done on the airplane that day. The building was beautiful, all glass and steel and modern design, with photos on the walls of young women who had come through the program, young women who were now engineers and scientists and doctors and professors, young women who had been given the chance to dream and the support to make those dreams real. Zara stood on a small stage in the main conference room, surrounded by board members and previous scholarship recipients and media representatives. Vivienne stood beside her, radiant in a purple suit that matched the one she had worn on the plane, her gold locket hanging around her neck where it always was now, where it would always be. In Vivienne's hands was a large certificate, embossed and official and beautiful. The Cole Foundation Lifetime Scholarship, awarded to Zara Winters for exceptional courage, character, and commitment to justice. This scholarship provides full funding for all educational pursuits in STEM fields from elementary enrichment through doctoral programs, including but not limited to tuition, books, housing, research opportunities, internships, and mentorship. Awarded this day, with gratitude and admiration, from Vivienne Cole and the entire Cole Foundation board. The audience applauded as Vivienne handed the certificate to Zara. But then Vivienne stepped back, gesturing for Zara to come to the microphone. I believe Zara has something she'd like to say. Zara stepped up to the microphone, which had to be lowered significantly for her height. She looked out at all the faces watching her, and instead of being scared, she felt strong. She felt brave. She felt like her grandmother was watching from somewhere, smiling with pride. My mom always says, when you see wrong, you make it right. Zara's voice was clear and steady, amplified through the room. I'm 8 years old, but I learned that age doesn't matter when it comes to doing what's right. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, young or old, powerful or not powerful. What matters is that you stand up. What matters is that you speak up. What matters is that you don't look away when someone needs help. She paused, looking at Vivienne with love and gratitude. Mrs. Cole lost something really important to her that day on the airplane. But she got it back because I saw something and I said something. And now, because of her, I'm going to get to study the stars. I'm going to get to learn everything I've ever wanted to learn. I'm going to get to become an astrophysicist. Zara's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But the most important thing I learned isn't about scholarships or schools or careers. The most important thing I learned is that standing up for others can change everything. It can change their life. It can change your life. It can change the world. Thank you, Mrs. Cole, for showing me that being brave is always worth it. Thank you for showing me that when you do the right thing, even when it's hard, good things happen. Thank you for believing in me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Vivienne stepped forward and wrapped Zara in a hug, and the cameras captured the moment. An 8-year-old girl and a 73-year-old woman, connected by courage and justice and the simple human act of standing up for what was right. Before you go, make sure you hit that subscribe button because stories like this matter. Stories about courage, about justice, about good people doing the right thing even when it's hard. And tell me in the comments, who was the person in your life who taught you to stand up for what's right? Share their story and keep their memory alive. The final image on every news broadcast that evening was a photograph taken at the ceremony. Zara and Vivienne standing together, both smiling, both radiant. Vivienne's hand rested on Zara's shoulder, and around Vivienne's neck, clearly visible, was the gold locket with the initials VC engraved on the front. The locket that had almost been lost forever. The locket that had been returned by a child who understood that some things are more valuable than gold, that memories matter more than money, that people matter most of all. Text appeared over the image, white letters on a dark background, telling the rest of the story in simple declarative sentences. Zara Winters begins her Cole Foundation scholarship journey this fall, enrolling in an elite STEM enrichment program for gifted students. She maintains a 4.0 GPA and has already been accepted into a special astrophysics mentorship program at the Franklin Institute. Candace Hartwell was terminated from her position immediately. She was arrested and charged with theft and fraud. She accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. She is prohibited from working in any customer-facing aviation role. The airline implemented sweeping changes to their anti-discrimination policies and training programs, using this incident as a case study in bias awareness and passenger advocacy. Vivienne Cole continues her work at Cole Aerospace Technologies and the Cole Foundation. To date, the foundation has awarded 847 full scholarships to young women of color pursuing STEM fields. Many of those scholars have gone on to work at NASA, SpaceX, Google, Microsoft, and leading universities around the world. And Rhonda Baptiste was promoted to lead flight attendant and later became a diversity and inclusion trainer for the airline, using her experience from Flight 447 to educate thousands of employees about the importance of standing up, speaking up, and doing what's right. The final sentence appeared. Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Sometimes courage comes in unexpected forms. And sometimes, standing up for a stranger can change two lives forever. The screen faded to black on the image of Zara and Vivienne, still smiling, still connected, still proof that good exists in the world, that justice can prevail, that children can teach adults, and that everyone matters. Every single person. The stars were waiting for Zara Winters. And thanks to her own courage and Vivienne Cole's generosity, nothing would ever stand in her way again.